In this video, I'm going to share how to get a sewing machine all set up and ready to sew with a twin needle. And I find a twin needle a really useful tool to use in sewing a handmade wardrobe because it gives a really great finish to handmade garments. I've got a sweatshirt here that I used a twin needle on for the neckline. As you can see, I top stitched the neckband down around here using a twin needle, and it gives a really clean and professional looking finish. So it's definitely worth learning how to use a twin needle on your machine, and it is actually quite straightforward. Once you've done it a couple of times, it's really simple, and it definitely is easier than I thought it would be before I gave it a go for the first time. So I'm going to show you how to thread the machine for a twin needle, but first of all I'll talk you through the tools you need to sew with a twin needle. And the first thing you need is 2 lots of thread for the top of your machine, 1 to thread through each of the 2 needles. And I've got 2 thread spools here that are both in a black colourway, so I can use those 2. But if you only have 1 thread spool available in the colour you want, what you can do is transfer some of that thread onto a bobbin and use the bobbin as your second thread for the top of the machine. So you've got 2 threads to the top of the machine, and you also need a bobbin threaded with the colour you want to use too, to put into the bottom of the machine and feed through on the bottom to finish the stitch. You also need something to hold the second thread in place on the top of your machine. And this is a tool that usually comes with your sewing machine. Here's mine. My second thread on top will go on this, and I'll show you where in a moment. You then need the actual twin needle itself. And when I'm sewing with jersey fabrics like this sweatshirt, I use this needle here. It is a Schmetz stretch twin needle, and I find it works really well. And you also need a tool to be able to change the needle over to insert your twin needle into the machine. So those are all the tools you need, and I'm going to turn the camera now and show you how I get it all threaded up. So I'm now going to show you how I go about threading my sewing machine to get it ready for using the twin needle. And the first thing I do is pop the bobbin in, and I'm just going to pop the bobbin in just as I would normally for any other project. There's nothing different needed for when you're sewing with a twin needle. So I've got the bobbin in, and I'm going to put the little bobbin cover on here. Then I'm going to take off the foot, just to make it really easy to take out the single needle that I was using on my last project. So I've got my single needle out there, and now I'm going to put my twin needle in, and I'm going to put that in just as I would do any other needle, to make sure it's nice and tightly held in place. And then put the foot back on. So the bottom's already on that end, and now I need to thread the top of the machine. So I'll show you that now. So now I'm going to show you how to get your 2 threads you'll be using on top of the machine all threaded through the machine and through the twin needles, so you can get started on some twin needle stitching. And the first thing you need to do is take one of your threads and just thread it the way you would do the normal way on your normal existing thread holder at the top here. So take it through all the normal steps. The one thing you need to do though is when you get to the tension discs here, you need to make sure you know which side you've put this thread, because the second thread needs to go on the other side of the tension discs. So I'm taking this thread through the left hand side of the tension discs, and then I'm going to put this on here, just take it through the rest of the process for threading the machine and thread it through the first of the needles. And I'm just going to show you a close-up of what I mean by where to put the threads through the tension disc. So you need to make sure that one thread goes on each side of this silver disc here. So now I've got my first thread all threaded up through the machine and through the needle, and it's time to pop on my second thread, which I've got here. So for this one I use this thread holder here that came with my machine, and I pop the thread on here, and then I follow the same process of threading just as I did for the first thread. But when I get to the tension disc here, I'm going to make sure this second thread goes through on the right side, so the opposite side to where my first thread went through. So I'm going to pop that through now, all through the same process, down the right side there, back up and around, and then I'm going to get that threaded through the second twin needle. So I've now got both of my twin needles threaded up here, and it doesn't matter which thread goes through which side of the twin needle. The most important thing is just that they each go through a different side of the tension disc here. And as you can see, the threads do look slightly tangly up here, but I don't find that to be a problem. As long as they're not knotted together or anything, I find they'll run smoothly once you get started. So I've got my machine turned on now, so I'm getting ready to sew with my twin needle. And sew with the twin needle, you need to use a straight stitch on your machine. So that is the number 1 stitch for my machine. And then you need to think about whether any other settings need to be adjusted. And I've had an experiment with my machine in the past to find out the best settings and what gives the best finish for when I'm sewing with a twin needle. And I found that a stitch length of 3 gives the best finish for my machine. So I'm going to increase the stitch length to 3. But you might wish to have a play around on your machine to figure out what works best for your machine. I basically took a piece of jersey fabric and ran it through the machine on different stitch lengths and just adjusted the tension slightly too to compare. And I found that the standard tension of 4 which I've got up here, and a stitch length of 3 gave the best finish on my machine. And then when I get started on a new project that I'm going to be using a twin needle on, what I usually do is I use a piece of scrap fabric, the same fabric as I'm planning to use for the project, just to test out those settings and make sure it does give a good finish on that new fabric. So I'm going to show you now how I go about using a twin needle using a piece of jersey fabric. So now I've got the fabric ready to sew, and it's a loop back jersey fabric, and I'm going to have a go of sewing it on the fold because I generally find I'm using the twin needle when I'm either top stitching down a couple of layers of fabric or I'm using a hem, so it's often a double layer, so that will hopefully reflect the finish quite well. So I'm just going to give it a go now by sewing it in a straight line. And you can't go backwards using a twin needle, but you can use a sort of finishing knot on your machine if your machine does tie off at the end of a line. So I'm just going to tie off now. And then I'll take that piece of fabric out and show you what it looks like. So here is my twin needle stitching. You can see the front there, and I'll turn it over, and there's the back too. And it's got a nice bit of stretch to it. So yeah, I'm pretty pleased with how that turned out. So I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope it might encourage you to have a go at using a twin needle on your sewing machine too, if you haven't done so already. I think it's a really worthwhile skill to know because the twin needle gives such a nice finish to handmade garments, and it's pretty straightforward to use too. So thank you very much for watching. Please do check out my other sewing tutorials, as well as my other sewing videos on YouTube where I'm talking all about making my handmade wardrobe. Thanks again, and I'll see you soon. Bye!